Thank you for listening to this resource provided by Westwood Baptist Church. Listen as Pastor Steve Smart brings a message of hope in Jesus Christ.
If you're here this morning because you're celebrating Rick's baptism and you are at all concerned, or if you're just, whether you're a guest or a visitor, and you're all concerned because Rick has a long history. He's Methodist, he was PCA, sprinkled. And if you're here because you just couldn't believe he was going to get baptized, let me tell you, he put up a good fight. I had to push him under, but we got him. We got him under. To God be the glory. Well, if you have your Bibles, and I hope you do, let's turn to Genesis chapter 8. Genesis chapter 8. I want to, while you're turning there, express my deep, deep, deep gratitude to you, our church family, for allowing our family to get away for the length of time that we were able to. It's a bit of a stretch. I think it's the first time in 13 years that I've been here that I took 2 Sundays off in a row. But here's why I could do it. For the first time, this is no disparity on any disparaging on anyone in previous ministry here at all. We've been blessed by those who've gone through. But for the first time, really, this is the first season where I have been able to say that God has blessed us with a ministry staff of pastors and ministry leaders that I can leave and the church not skip a beat. And you are blessed by your ministry staff. I worshiped with you. We worshiped with you online as we traveled. And just for the record, we have never left our kids at Walmart. And I want to make sure that is dispelled. Cheryl has, but we haven't together. Anyway. But I want to give my sincere gratitude to Paul and to Andrew and for their faithful exposition of God's Word, and to our whole ministry staff for the way that way they serve this church. Would you just let me give them a thank you with me? Amen. Praise the Lord. Genesis chapter 8, as Andrew said, and I think Matt referred to it too as well, this is our summer series. For quite some time now, for years, we've been going through, we've had a summer series, and we've had summer in the Psalms and different things. Well, what we've been doing these past couple of years, we've been going through Genesis. And we find ourselves now at Genesis. Now we've taken a break in John. We'll come back to John in the fall. So just for these 3 months, June, July, and August, we're going to be looking at Genesis, and we're going to pick up where we left off. And this is where we left off. In August of last year, in our study of Genesis, we left at Genesis chapter 8, verse 1a, that first sentence there, where it says, God remembered Noah and all the beasts and livestock that were with him in the ark. And that's where we stopped, and we went back into our study of John, which we'll do again in the fall. But for now, we're going to look through, pick our journey of Genesis back up, and enjoy this Old Testament look here in Genesis. In Genesis chapter 8, the scene, I want to make sure we understand what it looks like here in Genesis chapter 8. The scene for our text this morning is, to put it very simply, is a bleak wasteland. The earth has just experienced something that no one has ever witnessed before. Now, you got to wrap your mind around that because that kind of sets the pace for what's transpiring with Noah. and what we're going to see as the story unfolds. Nothing like this has ever happened before on the earth. No one has ever witnessed such a cataclysmic experience. In a matter of what couldn't have been more than a few hours, a violent deluge of water had brought massive destruction to everything that had been built by the hands and the minds of human invention. And this idea, let me just pause here. This idea that early humans were ignorant and stupid and they had to evolve in their intelligence is a farce. God created them with intelligence. God created them with extreme capabilities. There's no doubt about it. And so you got to imagine a world prior to the flood, what it must have looked like. We can't, we're amazed at all the technology that we're discovering today with AI and all this stuff that's coming up, and it's just amazing how rapidly it's. I personally don't believe it holds a candle to what it was like prior to the flood. I believe the technology, we should expect the technology of humanity to have been enormous. I mean, we can't even wrap our minds around it. And so you got to imagine at this point in chapter 8, all of this, by this deluge, has been destroyed. Everything is gone, except that which is inside the ark. The highest mountain has been covered by the waters that have plunged from above, and the waters that have burst from below. And you got to understand, nothing has been preserved. There's nothing. Other than Noah and his family, there are no survivors. No birds, no cattle, no reptiles. Every living beast that roamed the earth or swarmed the earth, everything on the dry land that breathed, is dead. Just as God created them, He decreated them. Every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals, creeping things, the birds in the heavens, were blotted out from the earth. It was, as one scholar put it, total, unexceptional death. And the reason for this devastation? Divine judgment. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. In other words, it wasn't like he went through moments of wickedness. It was like every thought was just constant wickedness. So the earth was corrupt in God's sight, filled with violence, and God saw the corruption. That the earth was filled with violence through the flesh of men and women who had been created to bear His image. So with a righteous determination, He determined to destroy them with the earth. And He said to Noah, a man whom He had placed His favor on, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall die. The justice of God's holiness would be fulfilled against the wanton sinfulness of humanity. Genesis chapter 7, verse 24 says, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. Friends, that's as clear a picture as we've ever been given of what happens when holiness and wickedness converge. Holiness will not tolerate wickedness. Light will not succumb to darkness. The discharge of God's justice will always prevail. It will always be honest, righteous, and it will always be administered with unconditional virtue. But just as is the case in every circumstance of God's justice, the attribute of His mercy remains infinite in His grace and His mercy and favor. And that's where we pick up our text from last summer. Genesis chapter 8, verse 1. But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. You look at that verse right there. Just dissect it for just a minute. With two words, look at how it begins. But God. With two words, but God, everything stops. All the way through chapter 7, to the end of chapter 7, there's destruction, there's anger, there's wrath, there's all these things that are taking place, and God's done with it, and he wipes it out. But then chapter 8, verse 1, but God, and everything stops. And then with another word added, but God remembered, everything reverses. It says, and God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. The earth had become a world of horrifying destruction and death. But then the torrential rains ceased. The flood waters began to recede, and not because the skies were now empty. It's not as though the skies ran out of water. The reason they ceased is because God kept his word. And he was faithful to remember what he had promised. As the waters subside, the recreation of the world begins. And here's what's interesting. It seems to follow a similar pattern to that which God first used when he created the world. Just as it was on the first day of creation, the Spirit of the Lord, remember, hovered over like a wind over the waters, like a helicopter suspended over the water. The Spirit was moving, hovering, while the elements remained in static rest. God presiding over this mass of creation elements, preparing it for formation. Now, a wind blows, and the waters begin to find their place. Verse 2. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were closed. The rain from the heavens was restrained. Just as the earth burst forth with springs of the great deep, and from the floodgates of the heavens, rain poured upon the earth. Now the great deep is no longer great. The massive floodgates are now closed, and the rain is subdued, and it's contained. Verse 3, and the waters receded from the earth continually. At the end of 150 days, the waters had abated. And in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. And the waters continued to abate until the 10th month. And in the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. So, as the sky withdraws to contain the waters within it, now the dry ground begins to appear. And the tops of the mountains begin to push their way through the surface of the water. And continually, imagine it, continually, little by little, the waters receded, slowly diminishing. A very different withdrawal from the way that they arrived in that torrential downpour. 73 days pass from the time the ark settles on Ararat to the day that the peaks of the mountains begin to be seen. Verse 6. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made. So just as the waters gushed and filled the earth for 40 days, Noah, now notice, waits 40 days. Now that's significant. Noah waits 40 days, verse 7, and then he sent forth a raven. And it went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth, and just like it was on the 5th day of the creation. When the first birds flew above the earth across that expanse on that 5th day, now a raven flies across the surface of the waters. Verse 8, then he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters had subsided from the face of the ground, but the dove found no place to set her foot. So 7 days had likely passed at this point. 7 days have passed before Noah releases a dove. And unlike the releasing of the raven with no clear purpose stated, the dove is intended to be in the eyes of Noah, looking to see if the dry land has appeared. The significance of the raven and the dove are unique. The raven itself was an unclean bird, considered unfit for consumption. It was expendable. It was a throwaway, so to speak. It wasn't good for food. It wasn't good for any other purpose, no sacrifice. But a dove is released. And unlike the raven, the dove is a bird of value. It's a symbol of sacrifice for purification, a sin offering that would be used by the poor. A raven is rough, it's weathered, just like the world. But a dove is noted for its beauty, for the way it flies and the way it gently perches. But the dove finds nowhere on the earth to rest, because the whole earth is still claimed by the waters. Notice where it does find rest. Look at verse 9 continues. She returned to him. Who's that? Noah. She returned to Noah to the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand and he took her and he brought her into the ark with him. So the dove finds rest and welcome in her return to Noah. And though the ark found rest on the peaks of Ararat, the dove doesn't find rest. So Noah rescues it. Once again, we can see the significance, I think, of the meaning behind Noah's name. Do you remember what Noah's name means? Rest. He takes that bird back into the safety of the ark. The raven, an unclean bird, leaves the ark. Notice it has no intention of returning. Do you see what it said? Let's look back at what it said. It said, he sent forth, it went to and fro. Went back and forth, had no intention of coming back to the ark, no intention of going back to the peace and the safety of rest. But the dove, unlike that raven who's content to scavenge in the vulgarity of the world's rot, that dove is a bird that symbolizes purity. And that dove leaves the ark, but it returns. And when it does, it finds rest in Noah, who welcomes it back to safety. Isn't that a great picture of what God does for us? Isn't that a great picture of how sometimes we wander into the ugliness of the world? And we search the ways of the world and we look for things of the world, but then we realize the world has nothing for us to have, and so what do? We return back and we go to the safety of God's protection. And so what does God do? He receives us back. And he welcomes us back into the safety of the ark. Verse 10 says, he waited another 7 days. And again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came back to him in the evening, and behold, in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth. That dove's return with the olive leaf brings the first testimony to life, that the earth was again bringing forth vegetation. Verse 12, then he went and waited another 7 days, and he sent forth the dove, and she did not return to him anymore, knowing that the dove must surely have found safe rest. Noah and all the inhabitants of the ark are now free to venture out from its protection. So, verse 13. In the 601st year, the first month, the first day of the month, the waters were dried from the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark, and he looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. In the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth had dried out. In verse 15, then God said to Noah, now stop there. Can you imagine? Take just a minute and imagine what that must have been like. Imagine at this point, when we get to verse 15 and Noah realizes everything's dried out, imagine what it must have. You're the only people on the face of the earth. Everything looks different. Nothing looks the same as it did before. Everything is different. Nothing looks familiar except the creatures that you've been caged with for the past 364 days. And then God speaks. Moses doesn't really tell us any more than that, just that God said, that God spoke. Now pause there for just a minute. And I want to make sure we really grasp the scene here. 57 days have gone by since Noah peeled back that sunroof. And Noah and his family, now notice, they haven't budged. They've sat on that ark. He opened the sunroof. He sees the window. He sees what's out there. But 57 days later, he's still sitting on the ark. Surely he was ready to get off that thing, right? I mean, you can't imagine. You have to think about that. Surely he wasn't content to stay on that ark. Why wait? Why wait 57 days after you know you can step out? Why did Noah wait? Why not, as soon as you see that the ground was dry, why not step out onto dry land? I mentioned Paul. Paul sent a picture. I thought this was funny. Kathy asked me if I'd heard from Paul. Paul texted. Paul's not one, as you heard last week, to enjoy flying on airplanes. And Paul had to go to New Orleans on an airplane, and they left yesterday morning, and so he texted to let us know that he had arrived safely. And he sent a wonderful picture of a man who was on his knees kissing the ground by an airplane. And so he was very glad. Now you have to imagine, if you take that and you imagine, that had to be how Noah must have felt. Have you ever been on an airplane? Maybe you've flown overseas or something and gone over, and it's been an 11-hour flight. Man, you just want to get on flat ground. Or you've been on a boat and you don't want to rock anymore. I mean, you got to put yourself in his position. Surely he was ready to get off that boat. Why? Why doesn't he? Moses doesn't tell us why. But it seems obvious based on Noah's history so far that Noah stayed on that boat because God said, get on the boat. And he hadn't told him anything different. And I want to make sure we get that. I think the reason Noah stayed on that boat is because God said, get on the boat, end of story. And he hadn't told him anything different. But now, almost 2 months later, God gives him the green light. Let me give you a little sidebar here. This is a lesson I learned from a pastor I worked with when I was in seminary. It's a lesson I think that I've repeated more times than the ministry staff here can count. And here it is. Buckle your seatbelts. This is a freebie. Sometimes the right thing at the wrong time is still the wrong thing. And when God closes a door, don't look for a window. You wait for him to open that door. Verse 15 says, then, in other words, finally. I think you can put that there, right? That's what he means. Finally, God said to Noah, go out from the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing that's with you of all the flesh, birds and animals and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may swarm on the earth and be fruitful and multiply. In other words, here's what: become numerous, repopulate. He's not just speaking to the birds and the animals and every creeping thing. He's talking about Noah and his wife, Noah's sons and their wives. He's saying for them to go make families, be fruitful, multiply. And here's what I hear God saying to Noah when he says that: go and live on the earth. And as you do, build it and enjoy it. Yes, the world is fallen. And yes, it's falling further every day, but that doesn't mean that we have to give in to it, that we have to live in fear and misery and defeat. Nowhere in the scripture does God command or endorse global misery. So turn off that news. Get off Twitter or Instagram or whatever social media of your choice is, and unless you're under some kind of medical restriction, go to Publix, buy you some salted caramel ice cream, and enjoy every calorie of it. Watch a Braves game. Get you some boiled peanuts and a glass of sweet tea and watch the University of Florida Gators. No, come on now. We won't do that. But they are advancing in the tournament. But anyway, that's a different story. Here's the thing, friends. If you're going to breathe God's air on this earth, then live a life that's worth living. Not just for your good, but for the good of others. Don't live above your means, but be fruitful. Live in the provision and the abundance that God provides for you. Find something you enjoy doing and go do it, and then build something for others to enjoy with you. That's what I hear when he says, be fruitful and multiply. Verse 18. So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife, his sons' wives with him, every beast, every creeping thing, and every bird, everything that moves on the earth went out by families from the ark. Now put yourself in Noah's place here. All right? And imagine what this must have been like for him. Imagine Noah, all right? Imagine Noah almost like an Adam repeat. It's a do-over. Imagine Noah as an Adam repeat. Imagine him stepping into a world that's been washed clean by judgment. The skies being filled with the birds, increasingly filling the air more and more each day. Imagine those huge animals, the beasts, the dinosaurs, lumbering around the new vegetation as they scatter and they multiply. Imagine what it was like when Noah went out. His sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. Imagine him standing in the midst of all that increasing beauty under a blue sky and a green earth beneath him. Now imagine him standing, remembering what it was like before. Remembering what it was like before and all that's happened since. And then now standing there with his family under the sunlight of a new world, remembering that he's there. And the reason he's there is because God remembered him. Because God kept his promise. When it says that God remembered, that word in the Hebrew, zakar, doesn't mean something he had forgotten and suddenly it recalled to his mind. That's not the word that zakar implies. Rather, it refers to the fidelity given to the promise he had made to Noah in chapter 6. Before all this began, he said, I'll establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. It's the same expression that will be used when God does make his covenant with Noah, and then establishes the promises within it by the covenant sign of the rainbow. It's the covenant of deliverance. Just like Lot was delivered from Sodom, because why? God remembered the plea of Abraham. Just like the Hebrews were delivered from their apostasy. Why? Because God remembered the intervention of Moses. So were these 8 souls delivered from the destruction of the world. Why? Because God remembered the promise that he had made to Noah. So what are we to do with this text this morning? Let's put ourselves in Noah's place. Like Noah, we all go through seasons when we feel the sting of abandonment. Now, I wanted you to make sure, let's put ourselves in Noah's place. All those months he's on that ark, imagine what it was like for him. We all go through seasons of abandonment, sometimes wondering if God has forgotten us. No matter what the circumstances are, friend, God has not forgotten. God remembered Noah, and he remembers us. He remembers you. Chapter 8 begins with that very assurance. It says, but God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. Now think about that. There must have been times that Noah felt abandoned by God. Surely. All that time on the ark, I mean, yeah, he had all his I's dotted and T's crossed and everything was in its place. I get it. Surely there were those hours, though, man, where it just seemed like God was nowhere. Shakespeare talks about that in an old play, Hamlet. If you ever read Hamlet, you remember the prayer when he prays. And he stops praying and he says, Words without thoughts never to heaven go. It's like the point he's saying, it's like when I pray, I feel like they're just hitting the ceiling, bouncing right back. Abandoned. Like God's not there. I know he's there, but I don't see him here for me. Must have been times that Noah felt that abandonment. And in fact, I think he was, in a sense, abandoned. Abandoned by God's intervention, left to endure that torrential downpour apart from the awareness of God's continued presence and protection. There's no indication that God ever made himself known during the time he's floating on that boat. The Bible doesn't tell us, and then 10 days in, God said to Noah, I'm still here. Don't worry, I hadn't forgotten you. Still here. No. Silence, as far as we know. So in a sense, I think you could say Noah's been abandoned. But God remembered him. And even though he seemed absent, God never left Noah. God provided for Noah before the storm occurred. Before there was the first raindrop, God had already provided everything that Noah was going to need for those months ahead. He provided for him through the storm. He kept that boat afloat in the midst of it all. Even though Noah had no idea of God's continued presence, God was there, and he kept that boat from sinking. And then he was there to rescue him, and then to guide him when it had ceased, every step of the way. My mom had a terrible fear of storms. When you live on the east coast of Florida, you get some doozies. If any of you ever spent any time, you've had a nor'easter come down across the coast, or you have some come across the Atlantic, you get some real whoppers that come through Florida. Usually happen about 2 o'clock on a June afternoon or any other afternoon, so to speak. Well, we got some doozies. Lots of lightning. Don't get as much as wind as we get here. We get a lot of lightning, thunder. My grandmother, I think she sewed that into my mom. My grandmother, in fact, when I was a kid, I was a latchkey kid, so I'd be home for about 2 hours after school. And if there was a storm or something like that, you could count on the phone ringing, and it was going to be my grandmother, and she was going to tell me, all right, do you have the TV unplugged? Because I'm going to tell you. And then she'd start telling me about the time that she saw a fireball fly out of that television and hit the thing. I mean, I heard that story 1,000,000 times. My mom shared that fear. Because for her, storms brought nothing but worry. For her, storms were gloomy. Storms were threatening. In fact, the earliest memory that I have was being in a rocker as a toddler while she sang. In the dark of the midnight, have I oft hid my face, while the storm howls above me, and there's no hiding place. Mid the crash of the thunder, precious Lord, hear my cry. Keep me safe till the storm passes by. Many times Satan whispers, there is no need to try, for there's no end of sorrow. There's no hope by and by, but I know thou art with me. And tomorrow I'll rise, where the storms never darken the skies. When the long night is ended, storms come no more. Let me stand in thy presence on that bright, peaceful shore. in that land where the tempest never comes, Lord, may I dwell with thee when the storm passes by. Do you know the chorus? Till the storm passes over, till the thunder sounds no more, till the clouds roll forever from the sky. Hold me fast, let me stand in the hollow of thy hand. Keep me safe till the storm passes by. You see, life brings its share of storms. Brings heartache, hurt, loss, betrayal, illness, death. Life has its share of storms. The world can sometimes seem like a very dark, gloomy, threatening place. But just as God remembered Noah, God remembers those who trust him, who wait on him, who obey him. And we have the assurance of knowing that when the storm is past, just as God has held us through it, he'll never let us go.
Thank you for listening to this resource provided by Westwood Baptist Church. While we are so glad you were able to listen, we encourage you not to allow this to take the place of you attending a local church. If you would like more info on Westwood, follow us on social media at Westwood Life or visit us online at westwoodlife.org.